There was a time in the 1990s when Death Row Records wasn't just a label. It was a kingdom. And at the center of that kingdom stood a man feared by many, respected by some, and obeyed by all. Suge Knight. But like all empires built on ambition, power, and violence, Death Row's rise was rapid, and its fall was brutal. This is the story of how one label came to dominate hip-hop and self-destructed in a blaze of money, fame, betrayal, and blood. In the late 1980s, the streets of Compton, California, were boiling over with tension, injustice, and raw energy. And through that chaos emerged a new voice, one that refused to be silenced. That voice was NWA, a rap group whose groundbreaking album, Straight Outta Compton, sent shockwaves across America. Leading their sound was a genius producer named Dr. Dre, who sculpted beats that felt like sonic riots. But behind the music was a darker story. Dre, despite his success, wasn't seeing his fair share. Greedy contracts, internal disputes, and a controlling figure in Eazy-E pushed Dre and his friend the D.O.C. to break free from Ruthless Records. That's when they met Suge Knight. Suge Knight was no ordinary businessman. Towering at 6'3" and weighing over 300 pounds, he was a former football player turned bodyguard for Bobby Brown. But Suge wasn't here to play defense. He wanted to rule, and he knew exactly how to do it. With intimidation, street connections, and absolute control. Legend has it that Suge, accompanied by a crew of men wielding bats and pipes, coerced Eazy-E into releasing Dre from his contract. With Dre, D.O.C., and funding from Michael Harry O. Harris, a convicted drug kingpin who bankrolled the label from prison, Death Row Records was born. From the very beginning, Death Row was explosive. In 1992, Dr. Dre dropped The Chronic, the G-Funk sound, laced with heavy bass and smooth melodies, changed the sound of hip-hop forever. Alongside Dre was a lanky young rapper with an effortless flow, Snoop Doggy Dogg. Together, they painted the West Coast golden. Doggystyle followed, debuting at #1 and going quadruple platinum. Death Row wasn't just winning, they were dominating. And soon, they weren't alone. Nate Dogg, the Dog Pound, RBX, and Lady of Rage joined the crew, turning Death Row into an unstoppable force. But Suge wanted more. In 1995, he did the unthinkable. Bailed out Tupac Shakur, who was sitting in a New York prison for a sexual assault conviction. Suge paid the $1.4 million bond, and in return, Tupac signed with Death Row on a contract famously scrawled on a piece of toilet paper. It was a desperate pact, but a game-changing one. All Eyez on Me, Tupac's double album, was an instant classic. Tracks like California Love and Two of America's Most Wanted showcased a triumphant trio, Dre, Snoop, and Tupac, all under one roof. Death Row was at the peak of its power. But the cracks were already forming beneath the gold-plated surface. Suge Knight's business tactics had become increasingly aggressive. His offices were filled with gang members. Artists were reportedly beaten. Employees lived in fear. According to rapper Corrupt, Suge once forced a staffer to drink urine in front of the entire crew or be beaten. That employee vanished soon after. Then came the Source Awards of 1995. With East Coast tension rising, Suge called out Puff Daddy on stage in front of a New York crowd. Any artist out there who want to stay a star, don't want the executive producer all in the videos, come to death row. That one comment lit the match. The East Coast, West Coast feud exploded. A year earlier, Tupac had been shot in New York. He believed Biggie Smalls and Bad Boy Records had something to do with it. The beef escalated in public. On Hit 'Em Up, Tupac didn't hold back, calling out Biggie, Faith Evans, and the entire East Coast scene with venom never heard before. As the feud boiled over, Dr. Dre had had enough. Tired of the violence and fear ruling the studio, he walked away. In 1996, he would start Aftermath Records, leaving behind the empire he helped build. 6 months later, tragedy struck. On September 7th, 1996, Tupac was riding shotgun in a BMW driven by Suge Knight. They were in Las Vegas, leaving a Mike Tyson fight, when a white Cadillac pulled up and opened fire. Tupac was hit 4 times. 6 days later, he was dead. 6. The world mourned, and death row shattered. Knight was caught on camera attacking a known gang member just hours before the shooting. It violated his parole. He was sent to prison for 9 years. Without Suge, the label floundered. Lawsuits hit hard, from Tupac's estate, from former partners, from record distributors. The hits dried up. The magic was gone. In 1997, Snoop Dogg left, saying he feared for his life. Death row was dying. By the early 2000s, the empire had crumbled. In 2006, Suge Knight filed for bankruptcy, listing debts over $100 million. The legend of death row was reduced to courtrooms, scandals, and distant memories of greatness. In 2015, Knight's story took a final, devastating turn. He was arrested for running over and killing a man with his truck, captured on camera. In 2018, he was sentenced to 28 years in prison. The empire builder was now a prisoner of his own chaos. But in a twist no one expected, the story wasn't over. In 2022, Snoop Dogg, once death row's rising star, bought the label that made him famous. His dream? To bring it back to glory. Under his leadership, death row now enters a new chapter. Cleaner, smarter, and rooted in legacy, not violence. Once an empire of fear and talent, Death Row was a reflection of the streets it came from. Brutal, brilliant, and unforgettable, its music changed the world. Its legacy still echoes. This was the story of Death Row Records. Where should we go next?